right. Hello. Thank you for joining us for Skype session number 5. We are going to be discussing an article that we have read for this week. But before we start doing that, like always, we're going to introduce ourselves and then talk about the Skype session. I will start with myself. I am Shivani, and I live in Washington, D.C., and I go to school at uh, George Washington University. Sukanya, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi everyone. Good evening. I'm Sukanya and I'm pursuing Masters in Human Resource Management at NYIT. Bethany, you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Bethany. I'm getting my master's at Marquette University in Milwaukee in international affairs.
Okay. Maribel, do you want to go?
Sure. Hi, I'm Maribel, and I recently graduated from the Social Entrepreneurship Program in AU. So I'm more excited to say that I'm from Brooklyn, and I've made up this new role called interdisciplinarian. So I have many different disciplines. So educator, photographer, and immigrant rights supporter in some ways. Yeah.
Cool. I'm Meghna. I am the UX UI designer for Impaction, and I live in Washington, D.C.
Great. Thank you, ladies, for being here. So the purpose of these Skype sessions is to show the power of collaborative innovation. And here we discuss an article every other week, and then we try to learn about other people's perspectives in regards to this particular article. So thank you, ladies, for introducing ourselves, or describing and introducing all of you. But today we're going to be discussing an article from Wired called Saving Lives with Tech Amid Syria's Endless War. The article states that in the last 7 years since the start of Syria's civil war, it's estimated that at least 500,000 Syrians have been killed. This number includes tens of thousands of civilians killed in airstrikes carried out by the Syrian president's regime and its allies. Meanwhile, U.S. And coalition forces are estimated to have killed as many as 6,200 Syrian civilians in their air campaign against ISIS. There are millions of people that still live in unending fear of the sound of fighter jets ahead in this region. So, seeing this as a crucial human rights issue, 2 Americans and 1 Syrian coder created a service called Sentry, which notifies Syrians in the region via Telegram and Facebook of the location and time of the upcoming airstrikes to give people a better chance of survival. It is important to note, with all of this being said, that Impaction does not contribute to a political agenda of any kind. Rather, during the session, we are going to be discussing how technology, if used strategically, can literally save people's lives. So, having said all of this, I would love to hear all of your thoughts.
I can start if you all don't mind. So I am actually always very cautious about technology. I'm more of a people person, and with seeing the ways in which technology has perhaps hurt our social fabric, I was very excited to see this article in evidence to how technology is just a tool that doesn't really have a right or wrong, but it's how we use it and how we apply it. And in this case, it's saving lives. So that to me was the most important part, I think, of how hard work, collaboration, I think courage it takes for people to get together, decide to take lower salaries, work tremendous hours, and apply their brain, their skills to creating products that can help people. I think that highlights sort of all those things for me. And yeah, I think it takes a lot for people to go outside of their comfort and decide do this instead of going to working at a company that will compensate them monetarily better, or maybe with security or something. So that's the way I'll start.
I thought the different backgrounds of the two Americans especially were interesting because they both came from like really unique areas like tech, but also finance and a few other places. And so it's interesting to hear how people's journeys are so different, and then they end up in something either in the social sector or like some sort of humanitarian event leads them to completely change trajectories. And so I found that like interesting, but also semi-inspiring. Like there's always a way to kind of change paths, and none of their backgrounds were particularly like suited for this, but they ended up coming up with something that's like really helpful and unique anyway. So
Well, I just want to agree with Maribel, and this is something I've been thinking about a lot lately too. The effect of technology, whether being good or bad, really just depends on in whose hands this is and what they're applying it for and what their intentions are. So I feel like a lot of this discussion is coming up lately because of AI and robots taking jobs, and between all this discussion, it's just a lot of, is technology good or bad? But it's neither. It's really what we do with it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I mean, at first glance, I think this article is it gives you a lot of faith in humanity that, like Bethany said, three different people who came from different backgrounds saw or experienced people dying in another country. And usually, what we do, especially with media, is that we become numb to what is happening. As we see more and more negative news come through our feeds, we're like, oh, why aren't we holding policymakers accountable? Why aren't we holding the government of Syria accountable? Why aren't we holding the government of the US accountable? And we take to the streets and we protest, and that's effective. But to leverage a huge tool that can give the power, that can distribute power to the people, essentially. Whereas where this app initially, for people that were living by the airstrike, the air base, they were the ones that were reporting when a plane took off and what time it took off, and then they notified the three people that were working. So it was more of a communal effort, and we've seen, like, time and time again, communal efforts have been relatively effective when it comes to impacting and even saving people's lives. So this really did restore a lot of my faith in humanity, which was always good to see.
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely right in that sense of the amount of coordination that it took, and work and detail. Really, the amount of detail, it's just amazing. They actually described in the article the steps, or many of the steps that they went through, from just the kind of sensors that they use, the technology, to talking to the pilot and getting a sense of how long their travels usually are. And like I think Shivani mentioned earlier, she wanted to mention something about time. And I believe that it's important to see this effort as a combination or complementary effort to the other efforts happening around this. Or often I think talking to maybe some other social entrepreneurs or people that advocate for social entrepreneurship, it may seem that this is the new and improved solution that is the only one we need, or we only need the systemic ones, and maybe more direct ones are not needed. Today I actually spoke to someone from a church. I went to an interfaith gathering, and they are working with refugees in America here and in integration. They're doing like a wraparound service for two families, so they're welcoming them. So I just see sort of different kinds of solutions for different things, and also dealing with refugees, I guess, in this area. Um, and the technology one being just saving lives where they are. So here's an example that where a tool can be used almost directly as an emergency tool, but also it has potential for systemic, I guess, solutions, because it can inform the human rights advocates or whatever they are, or the courts, of what's actually going on, so the governments can be held accountable. So I thought that was the most unique part as well, is that yes, it's saving lives, and not only can it be used in a very direct way or in an emergency way, but it can actually be used for later evidence.
One thing that, can you hear me?
Yes.
One thing that I was really shocked when I was reading the articles, how when they reached out to different investors, venture capitalists, and foundations, how nobody was ready to fund them because of cyber security and all those things. So I was just wondering if did they have a tough time reaching out to investors? Maybe the idea could be implemented earlier if they had investors right away to back them up. So that was one thing I was really wondering in the article when I was reading.
Right.
Yeah, I'm just looking through this article right now. I'm sorry I didn't share this before, but this is what the article looks like. And it's relatively sizable when it comes to length, but it also tells a story of the social entrepreneurs and their journey, which is what Sukanya is talking about. And it's really, I think, just seeing their own narratives where they talk about a Syrian man, his name is Al-Nour, and how he wrote a testimony on how this app literally saved his family's life. It showed that it gave the entrepreneurs that much more validation, saying that this is the end need for our customer. And I hope to some extent that this had provided some validation for venture capitalists or funders in the area as well. We were talking about this before, but potentially this there might be political aspects to this app, and this is why some funders or some venture capitalists may be more hesitant to fund an app that may be quote unquote left agenda. But it comes with, I think it comes with the price. It comes with understanding that it can be applied to more than one population at once. So that to me is a takeaway as well.
And I think the success of the platform definitely has the potential to be like replicated in other either like conflict zones. Like this, now that this technology exists, I'm sure that it could be altered in other sorts of situations. And probably I'm thinking especially in like emergency, like medical response could have like implications for getting the right tools to the right people to the right places, especially in like a disaster type events. So that was another thing I was thinking when I was reading it. I was like, now that this exists, like there's a lot of places that it could also be applicable.
Yeah, I think the Sentry app founders ended up having to bootstrap to start, right? That takes a lot to say. I'm just gonna put in all my savings. Also, I was curious to know why they had chosen to have a for-profit model as opposed to another kind of model. especially when it comes to saving lives, there's I feel like this ethical dilemma. Like, can you make a device to save lives also profit the founders or profit someone? Is that how does that sit with people, with the users, or with the I guess probably not the funders. Once they get over the political part, they're probably happy to get some return, but especially the users, um, and people leaning more towards human rights, how that sits, that this company, is going to make a profit at some point from it.
That is such an interesting question. I didn't even think about that angle. Um, I think for me, it's just at this point, for the amount of good that they're doing, even if they made profit, I feel like it's not as important as the amount of impact they're creating. So maybe that's the justification. Human rights activists or just general population might be okay with it. That's just not something that would strike them as odd. But I mean, when you really think about it, this is a pretty, it's a disturbing situation to make any sort of money off of. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, this is, I think, often a question that, or really more, I think, a form of a feeling that comes up with users. I could think of maybe people who are subscribing to religious, maybe faith, and of course, there are also institutions that fundraise, and maybe as members, one may be worried that the funds will be misused by the people in charge of the money. So I see it as similar to that, uh, or nonprofit leaders or nonprofit presidents or CEOs that get paid tremendous amounts, or that they splurge a little in their operation, no budget. There's this debate, how much money can go into what, when it could be going into the mission. Um, the the way I see it, I think, is also similar to yours, um, where I think we already compensate people for doing things and creating services and products that are not as meaningful. So why not compensate people who are creating products that are saving lives or helping the world become better? If they within reason, but if they are doing tremendous amounts of work, why is it okay to, you know, to allow it in a way and not question why a CEO from, I don't know, multinational gets paid just so much more money than they probably ever will, and then we question nonprofit leaders or for-profit social enterprises when they're actually trying to do good work.
Right.
That's the way
I
I
also
see it
think
now.
In this sort of field too, like as in terms of being related to tech, the profit thing doesn't seem quite as uncomfortable to me, because you're looking at a field where like innovation is like always super necessary, and you have to kind of be on the front lines of like research and development. And so maybe the idea of like profiting in this sort of venture is slightly less uncomfortable, because you know that, or you assume to some degree that that money is going to go back into like innovating and investing in other technological solutions to things. So I don't know, maybe it's just the field. But in addition to your point, Maribel, I think that the idea of like innovation, also the money that is required to innovate in tech, maybe more than even in other like social sector or social entrepreneurship related fields.
But think about it, right? If this is such an extreme, an app for such an extreme cause, you're literally saving lives with data. But what options do they have? I mean, I do see this as more of a nonprofit than a for-profit, honestly, even if it's tech, because if it's a for-profit model, think about the options that they have. Are they going to have a subscription model? Do people have to pay a certain cost in order to have, like, be informed about the data? Is it going to be a more premium model? Is it going to, like, where people have to sign up for additional services if they want to get more access to data? Are they going to add additional features onto the actual service? I thought, to me, it was a very XY, right? Like X, you sign up, Y, you get notified, Z, XYZ. Z, you get to have like more quality data about where the next airstrike is going to be. And I don't know. I feel a little unsettled knowing that it is a for-profit, and especially because it's such an extreme case. And normally I don't feel this way because I do think that are a lot of overlaps. Like, for instance, here I'll share my screen. I shared this with you all on our WhatsApp group, but this particular model, right, where we saw, I don't know if you can see my screen, but it says core activities. This is like the nonprofit, entrepreneurial nonprofit realm. This is the conscious company / for-profit realm. And then, like, more in the middle is nonprofit or socially responsible businesses. So there's overlap between those two. But for me, it should be over here with the not-profit realm rather than even close to being on this spectrum, if that makes sense. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, actually.
I mean, I don't think that their model doesn't, up till this point, they've mostly been experimenting. So I don't think that their goal is profit making. I'm not sure, like you said, what model they would even use to do that. I just meant that the existence of profits from this in the future, with the model how it is, not like a pay as you go or like some sort of subscription model, but I would assume would be to like reinvest in the platform and make it as innovative as possible. So like that part of it doesn't bother me. Obviously, if it became like you have to pay to access the service, then that would be like a completely different model of what they're trying to use. So,
I'm very curious how they're going.
Yeah, it definitely comes as like a not like as it should be a nonprofit. But if they decided that they can be more innovative with like a for-profit model, like maybe that was the thought process.
Yeah, that's very
well. You can have R&D and experimentation with a nonprofit model, because that, what you're saying is actually a nonprofit model, which is the revenue goes back into the organization in some way or form.
Yeah.
Whereas the for-profit model, it's like the part of the revenue stays and part of the revenue goes out as compensation for whoever the funders or the founders. I was thinking more like they probably wanted that model to attract future funders so that they can scale. And then in that sense, they can create a more reach, and hopefully in reaching more people, increasing their impact, their social impact. So I would see it as a positive in that sense. I always, even though I do care that these people with good intentions and amazing skills get compensated, I do wonder about maybe the ethicals of who's actually paying in the future if they continue with their for-profit model. Right. Who will be the one to pay? Will it be the people that are sort of trying to save their lives with whatever few money they have left, because their jobs are probably being affected at this point in the civil war? Or will it be some other kind of model that will allow the people to still access this information for free?
That's a good point. I don't know. That's interesting.
We'll have to invite them.
I think we might.
Part two.
Okay, let's move towards the data side. So we had discussed this a little bit, but I want to share my screen again and talk about, I had posted this is kind of a plug into our Impaction website. Sorry for all of these pop-ups, but this is our idea forum page, and I had posted this particular idea on our idea forum page in the technology section. And Tanvi, our Impactions product manager, asked a question about misuse of data. So she asked, what are they doing for security? If civilians can just download this app and get the airstrikes information, even the terrorists can, or any other entity that wants to misuse the data. And I believe Bethany shared a similar sentiment, and so did Maribel. So let's talk about that. What are the potential misuse cases of this data?
I think in the article it said the government's being able to use the same technology, maybe not the data itself, but the same sensor technology to then track activists. I think that was a huge concern. But in terms of data security, I guess, like you mentioned, other people accessing it or hacking the system.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a concern. I'm not sure what the solution is to it, but it's definitely something to consider with like this large of amount of data. And the article said that they're really the only ones that have like this of a data set because it includes like all kind of sides of the conflict. And so, yeah, I would think that there's definitely potential for folks to want this data who would misuse it. But I guess the question is that like a risk? And I guess it's a risk they're willing to take to save the lives day to day that they're saving. And that would be my instinct as well, because you can't necessarily predict what other negative outcomes may be in the long term, but in the short term, like the impact is clear. So I feel like maximizing data security as much as you can is ideal, but outside of that, there are some things you're just not going to be able to prevent. So I'm not sure what the exact solution is, but I think that the risk is probably worth the benefits in the short term, at least.
It's hard because they're not like, typical, let's say, CSR company that collects lots of data, but no one really has to see it. They just have to be in charge of protecting it because they are an emergency response. They have to be quick with this information and get it to people as fast as possible. I think there's more chance for that kind of error with data. So it is a difficult thing to say, what can we do? Maybe one way they can go around that is starting to track IP addresses of computers, or I'm not sure if they can track, but then that gets into like privacy issues and are you allowed to do that? And and will the users be okay? They're trying to save their lives, they'll be fine with it, but it's still a problem. It'll still be an ethical concern and trying to avoid. And what if you make a mistake? You think it's a government, I don't know, iPhone or computer, and it's not. It's a civilian, and you just cost them their lives. But still, just this idea that maybe you can track who's accessing the information, so that you can protect the civilians, and I guess trying to make sure that you have protection against hackers.
There's layers, right? Like there's levels of layers of ethical issues in this particular article. The highest level is like able to survive, right? And then there's data security, data misuse, cybersecurity in terms of like having access to people's IP addresses. There's layers, and I think Bethany raised a really good point where do these layers, does one outweigh the other? Especially if you're talking about such high stakes, you're dealing with people with this. So, do legal issues, do they really need to be weighed as high as something that could potentially save someone's life? I don't know.
And this is where the for-profit model really makes this a tricky part, because you don't know, like, if they have data from whoever they have data from, if they at all collect it, not just also the trajectory of their aircrafts, but also maybe if they have data on users, like, are they able to sell this data for money, and who are they selling it to? But in the article, they mentioned some concerns about selling the actual technology of the sensors. And what if that's in the wrong hands? And they mentioned, the founders of Century mentioned they wanted to definitely make sure to be ethical with who they sold this technology to. But how do you really know? Because you could be selling this to someone you think is aligned with your values, but they could be undercover for all you know.
That's where it gets really, really tricky. I think the idea is great, and they're gonna have to work extra hard to make it scale in reality. There's going to be, as they grow, there will be more and more loose ends that they do have to tie. But like we said, I think our first impressions, they all reign true, that something like this is incredible, that the thought is even there. And they've already saved a family of children and a man named Al-Nour because of this app. And that is causing them to work 90 to 100-hour weeks because they want to save other people's lives. 90 hours to 100 hours a week people's lives. So it's great seeing people like this working for others.
And many times I think people in the technology field maybe at some point they've asked themselves, what am I actually doing with my life? And when they ask that question, they realize, I'm just helping some person become extra rich, and they don't really need that. So this is, I think, a great example to the question, what if we use this amazing talent instead of for purposes of someone's greed, for purposes of something good? And even if it has these downfalls, that's still just such a positive step in a new direction of now we're finally using people's capacity for something that makes a lot more sense, because it's benefiting the masses as opposed to benefiting one or two people.
I love that. And I think on that positive note, it wraps up the session number 5 for today. Thank you everyone for being here, and we will see you in 2 weeks.